My deceased father was a stutterer. The professionals who study stuttering do not agree just yet on its causes. Some say it's a neurological problem, others say that it is environmental and psychological. It does tend to run in families, though, and it is more prevalent in some social subgroups than in others. Generally, it is a malady of childhood, and it usually resolves itself by the time the child is grown. In my father's case, however, none of that applies. My father was the only stutterer in the family, and his problem got worse as he got older. I'm certain that his horrific experiences in World War II contributed to how bad his problem was. For him, it was a nervous disorder. It was a serious handicap that made him very self-conscious and held him back from having the confidence to pursue a further education or promotions in his career. Like the country music singer Mel Tillis, my dad could sing without stuttering, but when he was upset, which was just about all the time, he could hardly talk. So when in graduate school I came across research into stuttering, I was naturally very interested on his behalf. Researchers were surprised to discover in the early 1970s that among many Native American tribes, there was no instance of stuttering, and that in fact in the Indian languages of those tribes, there wasn't even a word for stuttering. They had no experience of it and no awareness of it. As with anything that you say about American Indians, you have to be careful about generalizing as whole of what amounted to many different tribes and nations, some with unique genetic markers, but still, stuttering is a problem for about 1% of the people throughout the rest of the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in the United States. So to have native tribes that had no instances of stuttering was amazing. Further research indicated that the tribes where there was no stuttering, that the children in those tribes were raised fairly permissively. There was no expectation placed on them for excellence in public speaking. There was no competition in those tribes about storytelling or even performance of religious rituals. That is, kids who grew up without being shamed or without being pressured into situations where they would be judged harshly, in the absence of fear and shame, there was no reason to have halting speech, no anxiety of peer judgment or rejection. And those who want to insist that there is a neurological explanation for stuttering have to admit that all of the effective treatments of stuttering are psychological. Not to say that physiology doesn't play a part, but it is evident that stuttering is just one possible reaction to a mean world. There are lots of birds, animals, fish, even insects that develop language of sorts that they use in their mating rituals, in hunting and defending their territory, and even in nurturing their young. However, humans, the most evolved and advanced in language, are the only ones that have developed the ability to destroy another person's life through the use of language. Which, if anyone is watching my grammar closely, you might question the use of the word evolution in this paragraph, because evolution implies improvement. The ability to insult, slander, destroy people's reputation, rob them of self-confidence, and push them to the point of self-loathing or even suicide can hardly be called evolution. Ironically, the better we become at communicating, the more efficiently we have become able in using communication to hurt people. In marriage counseling, we teach conflicted couples to talk to one another while they're touching each other. The more distance there is between two people, the more likely it is that they will use angry or abusive or violent language. If there's a table between you, even just that, or if one is standing at the other end of the room, the conversation is much more likely to turn ugly. It's very difficult to raise your voice to someone if you're holding both of their hands and looking right into their eyes. It can be done, but those are kind of scary people. However, you turn that into a telephone call or a letter or especially an email, and things can get really ugly really fast because of the distance. Social media sites on the internet are great for staying in touch with family and friends, for showing pictures of our kids, sharing our travels, and even some people feel obliged to share pictures of their dinner or breakfast or the antics of their cats. But social media, because it is communication at a distance, is also rife with insults, with put-downs, slander, gossip, outright lies. The New Testament, written nearly 2,000 years before the launching of Facebook, includes a stern warning in the 3rd chapter of James that says that the tongue is like a small flame that can set an entire forest on fire. If James, however, had been able to read some of the comments posted on the comment section of some of my newspaper articles, he might have said that the tongue was not just a small flame, but was more like a flamethrower. Even humor is something that we have to consider with some seriousness, because almost every joke has a victim. We talk about negative humor, but it's nearly impossible to tell a joke that doesn't come at someone's expense. And the rhetoric only heats up when the brunt of our jokes is a public figure, especially a politician, particularly one that's running for office. I took as our wisdom lesson today a quote from an unusual source. Bernie Meltzer was a popular radio talk show host in New York during the 70s and 80s, and even though the title of his show was What's Your Problem, which in a New York studio could be, hey, what's the matter you? Still, he was very concerned with civility. He said, before you speak, ask yourself if what you're going to say is true. Is it kind? Is it necessary to be said? Is it going to be helpful to say it? Because if the answer is no to any of those questions, maybe you should think about not saying it. There are things that are true that are not helpful and are not kind. There is a way that you can be so right that you are wrong. I know that's a difficult thing to think about, but there are ways in which you can be absolutely technically correct about something, but pursue it in a way that does harm to others unnecessarily. There are times when you can be satisfied simply with knowing that you're right without forcing your spouse to acknowledge it. Just be satisfied inside yourself. We should not remain silent about important things because we're afraid, which I think is the problem of most churches, is they fail to be prophetic because they don't want to offend anyone. You shouldn't be silent out of fear, but there are times that we can choose silence, not out of fear, but out of love. Just not to upset, offend, alienate, destroy community, separate people from each other. We've heard a lot in this campaign year about political correctness, and even when Megyn Kelly asked candidate Donald Trump a serious question about his very dismissive language about women, could have asked about Latinos or the Chinese, and he just dismissed the question as being just another form of political correctness. And what I found interesting watching that debate was that the crowd immediately burst into applause when Donald Trump has said horrible things about women. I mean, the guy is a real misogynist. And so when Megyn Kelly asks a very legitimate question and he calls it political correctness, everyone applauded, which makes you wonder how people really are feeling about having to be sensitive to issues that may not be their personal issue. Now, I'll admit, as a writer and as a public speaker, I sometimes find it infuriating to be called out on what seems to me to be harmless or insignificant issues. You know, when you think about my life, which you probably do all the time, don't you think about my life? I put about 15 pages of material into public every week. And most people wouldn't do a fraction of that. So I put a lot of material out there. I'm editing my old newspaper articles to turn into a book now, and I finally had to narrow it down to 100 essays because I've published over 1,000 essays. There's a lot of my stuff out there in the world. And so if you put out that much volume, even mountain goats stumble sometimes. I mean, you put out that much volume, you're going to say something the wrong way or say something you don't mean. A few months ago, I wrote a column advocating for the civil rights of the transgender community in Springfield, Missouri, because we were going to have that vote in April. And in my column, I said transgendered. And I had a hailstorm of people that were angry at me for the use of the word transgendered, because people who were born with one gender identity and are changing to another, it's a fluid thing, it's a process thing, and you're not at any point past tense, or most people don't want it viewed that way. So the transgender community wants us to use the word either trans or transgender, but not transgendered. I thought that was a little bit picky, but I'm not a member of that community, So people who are part of the trans community were angry with me, and I was like, what's the matter with you? I'm trying to help you, and you're trying to rain down fire and brimstone on me, but I'm not a member of that community. So who should choose how that community identifies themselves? I would say the people that are in that community have a right to call it, whether I'm comfortable with that or not. In a sermon a few years ago, I referred to a biracial child as being mulatto. I had no idea that word was offensive. It's a Spanish word, and in Latin America, it's used regularly, and no one is offended by it. But in the United States, referring to a child of a mixed race couple as mulatto is very insulting. I didn't know. I literally learned the word in Central America. So the use of the word in the United States, I had no idea that it was offensive. But again, I'm not from a mixed race family that I know of. I mean, it's hard to tell about these things, but to the best of my knowledge, I'm not. So people who are, if the word is offensive to them in North America, and apparently I live in North America, isn't it up to them to choose? Now, when we're in Central America, you can use that word without any problems, but not in the United States. I can tell you that after I became a father by means of international adoption, and I learned a lot pretty fast about sleepless nights and how a child can be so hungry they're screaming their head off but still too lazy to hold their own darn bottle, and the whole thing about changing dirty diapers, the added expenses, the babysitters, the clothes, the shoes, the college fund, and then someone would have the temerity to walk up to me in public and say, well, do you know anything about her real parents? And whenever someone would ask me that question, I would think, where can I hide the body? Where? Because the two teenagers who had sex in Seoul, Korea one night 26 years ago never had to fold the laundry, pay the tuition, or rush to several car accident scenes caused by her. I'm the real dad. And it is insulting to infer otherwise. People who never adopted a child may mean no harm in asking such a question, but I'm suggesting that it is in everyone's best interest not to phrase the question that way. Jeb Bush got himself in trouble recently by using the term anchor baby in reference to the children of illegal immigrants who gain American citizenship by virtue of having been born in North America, which, oddly enough, is how I got citizenship, and I think probably how most of you got citizenship. There was never any question about it. You were born here, you're one of us. So it's one of those messy little provisions of the American Constitution. Just seems like it's the way it goes. So he tried to mend fences with the Hispanic community, which he's married into, of course, by saying that he really wasn't talking about Hispanics, he was just talking about Asians. Which was a fairly incomprehensible move to me because it's hard to find a Republican Hispanic, but it's not hard to find a Republican Asian. So, he was kind of sawing his own leg off with that one. But who am I to explain the reasoning of Republican candidates? It even strikes me as being a tad close to home for Louisiana governor and presidential candidate Bobby Jindal, who was born in Louisiana to non-citizen parents. His mother was here on a student visa, and his father was here on a work visa. And by the way, Bobby's name is not Bobby. Bobby was the name of his favorite character on the Brady Bunch. So when he was 8 years old, he asked everyone to start calling him Bobby. His name is Payush. That's not relevant, except that I wish that Payush Jindal could remember to be both thankful for how he gained citizenship and be gracious to those who claim citizenship in the same way. I am, in that regard, an anchor dad. My daughter's only claim to American citizenship is because she was adopted by an American citizen. But I think that Valerie has made America a much better place. I think it's prettier because she's here. It's a nicer place because she's here. And I hope one day to be able to feel that way about Payush Jindal, but he's testing me. And you see what I mean about humor always having a victim. I mean, it's difficult even to be witty about something that someone doesn't end up with a bruise. Now, this church came into existence with the stated purpose of being a prophetic church that spoke truth to power. As a voice for the poor, a voice for the marginalized, we want to speak the truth in public protests and demonstrations and letters to the editor, and we would even do that in town hall meetings if only our congressman would hold town hall meetings, particularly any meeting in which only his donors were invited. The challenge I want to bring to you today is to be bold, to be courageous, to be outspoken, to be well-informed, to be prophetic. But I'm asking you to do your best to do those things in a way that is also kind, that is also considerate, even loving. Because this damn world that we live in can be so mean, it can make a child stutter. It can make you hide your gifts. It can make you conceal your potential because you're afraid of being criticized, of being ashamed, of being too shy. We want to bring light, but not so much heat to the world. We want to be the salt of the earth, but not the antifreeze in people's Gatorade. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with us.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.